Balder was as handsome and charming and brave and dashing as the day was long. And throughout his life, and gods of course do live an incredibly long time, his life had been full of joy and wonder and bravery and courage and daring do. He was beloved of all who cast their eyes upon him, except perhaps for the giants, but then the giants have no love for anybody. Had you asked anyone back in Asgard what the world, what the future would hold for Balder, every single one of them would have said more joy, more happiness, more chances to demonstrate his courage, his ability, his bravery, his wit, his charm, his integrity. Of course they would have said that. None of them would have predicted doom and gloom. And so when Balder went to his mother Frigg and said, "Mother, I have not been able to sleep for weeks," and indeed that handsome, dashing face had bags, suitcases practically under his eyes. He looked so haggard. "I've been having nightmares," he told his mother. "Terrible thoughts come to me. I see you weeping. I see father rending his chest and tearing at his shirt. I see Thor sobbing. I see Sif tearing at her golden hair. I see Iduna casting her basket of apples from her. I see all of the gods and the goddesses of Asgard in a terrible state. But I never see myself. A strange thing it is, these dreams that torment me. They seem so real." And his mother told him not to worry, and his father told him not to worry, and they ushered him out of the hall and took on his way. And as parents so often do, they put on a brave face, and as soon as they're alone, their worries come to the fore. And so it was. As soon as Frigg and Odin were by themselves, they sat and they chewed their fingernails, they worried, they fretted, they thought, what could these dreams be? For people back then appreciated that dreams are very rarely just frippery and nonsense. Dreams, particularly recurrent dreams, particularly dreams so powerful that they can keep the sleeper awake with fretting and tossing and turning night after night. Such dreams are prophetic in nature. And perhaps Balder was seeing something terrible in the future, something that would cause grief to the gods. And they discussed amongst themselves what they should do, and at length Odin said, "I will find someone who can interpret these dreams." And between he and Frigg, they bounced around the names of various prophets and seers and mystics and rune mages and people possessed of arcane talents. And one after another they thought, "Oh, no, that's unsuitable, too prone to say only ever what you want to hear, and this one has a reputation that's greatly overblown, that one is no longer trustworthy." And at length they both settled upon a name of a famous seeress possessed of immense sight into the future and of an ill temper such that if she saw bad things, she was not one to sugarcoat the pill. She would be blunt, she would be upfront, she would say if she saw gloom and doom quite to your face. And that is what they wanted. Honesty, not sugarcoating. And then Odin remembered the woman was dead. Not long dead, but dead nonetheless. But must the death of a Volva, a seer, be any reason not to talk to them? I think not. Odin thought not. And he donned a disguise, one of the many disguises for which he was famed the length and breadth of the 9 worlds. And he went on that long, long journey on Sleipnir's back riding through the 9 miles, going deeper and deeper and deeper into the lands of the dead, eventually into Helheim. And there he went mile after mile after mile on his journey, until he came to a great hall, wherein the shade, the ghost, the spectre, call it what you will, of that famous seer, that famous Volva, was residing. And as he entered the hall, it was vast, it was enormous, with wooden beams ornately carved, decorated with tapestries and with flags and with banners of the most beautiful sort, and the tables were laid out with fine plates, with good knives, with goblets. There was a great cauldron in one corner, bubbling away with mead that smelt wonderful. It was a banquet fit for the gods themselves, and Odin wondered who on earth were the dead planning to entertain in this extravagant fashion. There, in the corner, dressed in her furs and her tunic and her cloak and her beads and her talismans, snored the recently dead Volva. Odin leaned up to her and prodded her gently. She came to herself, and Odin, in his disguise, said, "I see this hall is bedecked for a great feast. Are you expecting a noble guest?" "Yes, indeed," said the old woman. "This is a hall fit for the gods, for we are due to receive our god." Odin felt himself growing a little pale. "Which god are you due to receive?" The seeress looked around her and she said, "We are to receive the boldest, the brightest, the best, the most beautiful of gods is due to come to us. I have seen it. I have told the other august members of the company of the dead, and they have created this banqueting hall. They have laid on such delicacies as only the dead can truly savour, and mead, oh, the mead of the dead is something to be envied." But still she had not told the name of the god who was due to descend into the lands of the dead. And Odin, in his disguise, tried again to prompt her. She said, "Tell me, who are you?" I am a wanderer. I am Vegtam, which means wanderer. I just wander seeking knowledge, seeking wisdom, and I saw this place, and I came in, and I asked, and you tell me, prophetess, what else do you see?" And the old woman looked him up and down, long and slow, and perhaps she began to suspect who this person truly was and see through Odin's disguise. "I see in far Fensalia, Frigg weeping for sure. Would you like to know more?" Yes, said Odin. And piece by piece, she let him know, without ever once saying the name, that Baldr would die, would succumb, would soon be in the land of the dead. And when he had established this, Odin took tail, returned on the back of Sleipnir, rode up and up and up and up to Asgard, and shared his discovery with his wife, with Frigga. And she wept and she sobbed for fear that her son, her beloved son, should soon be dead. And this knowledge was shared with the gods of Asgard. And they met and they gathered and they thought long and they thought hard about what could be done. Could anything be done to avert this prophecy, to avert this terrible fate come to pass for wonderful Baldr? And at length Frigg came to the idea that she would travel the length of the world. She would meet with every living creature, every wolf, every bear, every raven, every eagle, and ask them, to swear an oath to protect her son and not harm her son. And more than that, she would meet with the metals in the earth and ask them not to wound her son in the shape of swords or spears or axes. She would meet with everything she could think to meet with and secure an oath from it. And this she did with the help of all of the other gods, who all went around dividing up the beings of the world amongst themselves to travel the length and breadth. Every human, every dwarf, every elf, every creature of forest and field and ocean and mountain, one after another, even the giants themselves were obliged to swear oaths to protect Baldr, until at length, when they had worn through 1,000 pairs of shoes travelling the 9 worlds, the gods came back to Asgard and breathed a sigh of relief and thought, what is there left? What is there left that could harm the wonderful Baldr? And they wanted to put this to the test. And so Thor looked around himself and saw on one of the great tables set out in the hall of Asgard a knife. Without another word, he picked up the knife and he lobbed it at Baldr, and it bounced off him, not so much as a scratch. And the gods roared with laughter. And another picked up a goblet and lobbed that, and it bounced off, not so much as a bruise. It became a game in the coming days and the coming weeks for the gods to wander around and come back to the Hall of Asgard with a huge boulder, with a wolf, with a bear, with anything they could lay hands on, weapons after weapons, creatures and all manner of things, and they would lob them at Baldr and watch them bounce off, unable to hurt him whatsoever. All of the gods laughed and they roared at this. Bar one. Loki felt that nobody deserved to be that privileged. Death, who was, after all, one of his own, Hela, in Helheim, where she ruled. All creatures had their time of life, and all creatures had their time of death. The biggest, the bravest, the boldest, the wisest, the cleverest, the noblest, the meanest, the ugliest, the humblest, the most cowardly, all had their time to come and go. And all eventually would go to Helheim to be with Hel. Except, apparently, Baldr. Baldr was to be denied to Hel, denied a place in Helheim. He alone was to go on and on and on and on and on. Eternally handsome, eternally young, eternally brave, eternally bold. And really Loki felt that death should not be denied anyone. And he searched long and high, and he wore out 1,000 pair of shoes, going around and around and around the 9 worlds, talking to creature after creature, object after object, and every single one of them had been obliged to make an oath. Until at length he got into conversation, in disguise, for Loki too likes to change shape, in disguise with Frigg. And he had already established through his own wanderings the many things that she had succeeded in making to take an oath. And he praised her up, how brave, how wise, how foresightful she was in making these pacts, these oaths with bears and wild boars and eagles and the octopi of the ocean and one thing after another after another. But was there not something she had overlooked? Had she thought about plants? Yes, she had. She had sought oaths from all of the known poisonous plants and poisonous fungi. Anything wrong? Couldn't fault her on that. And what of this, and what of that, and what of the other? Loki, in his new disguise, would mention her, and Fleek would say, "Oh yes, that was oath. Oh, that was weeks ago. That was months ago. Oh yes, that was done. That was done." Until, running out of ideas, finally Loki chanced upon mistletoe. What about the mistletoe? "Oh, well," said Fleeger, "what would be the point? Mistletoe's only recently come into existence. It's so young. It's not been around long enough. It's not mature enough to take an oath. And besides, it's such a tiny little thing. What can a mistletoe do to my son? Or to anyone's son, or to anyone's daughter, for that matter? What can mistletoe do?" "Not a lot," said Loki, in his disguise, and then wandered off and found the mistletoe growing. And it was quite a small plant, and it was quite a humble little thing. New in the world, one of the most recent things to have evolved. And he thought, could it be used? Could it be used? And slowly the cogs in Loki's vast mind began to turn and think of ways in which it could be used, and ways in which his magic could weave itself around the plant to cause it to grow and grow and grow until the branches of the mistletoe were as thick as Loki's own arm, no longer the delicate little plant that he had first found. Oh, and once the mistletoe was so grown, he was able to cut it and shape it and twist it and sharpen it and create a javelin, a throwing javelin. And this he took with him back to Asgard, and there still the gods were taking their turns to lob one thing after another: chairs and tables and elephants and aardvarks and anything else they could find to pick up and lob at Baldr and watch it bounce off him. And Baldr, being very good-natured and very amenable, was allowing the gods to use him for target practice. Anyone else would have been bored to death. But no, he would allow them their laughter and their games and their fun, and appreciate that this was all in the spirit of care and concern, that they had gone to such lengths to protect him, that why should they not have their laugh, their joke afterwards, their little games. And Loki sidled up to Baldr, the blind god, who had listened to the laughter and the shouting and the jeering, but no one had thought to include Baldr in a game which, let's face it, required vision to be able to see the thing that you were throwing at. So they just left him in the corner whilst they'd been laughing and joking. Oh, they kept him supplied with mead, filled up his flagon on a regular basis, and slapped him on the back and told him who'd thrown what, where, and when, and why. And Baldr could listen to the laughter and listen to the things boinking off of Baldr and crashing into the furniture. But none of them had actually tried to get him to throw anything. Until Loki came in and said, Baldr, my friend, would you not like to participate? Would you not like a turn throwing something? I will point you in the right direction. I'll tell you roughly how far ahead of you Baldr is, so you know how hard to throw. And I'll tell you which direction the object bounces off him in. And Baldr said, "That's most kind of you, my friend, most kind." And so Loki led Baldr, stood him a few yards away from Baldr and said, "Face in this direction here, let me put this into your hand," and he gave him that sharpened length of mistletoe javelin. So, You need to chuck it about 10 yards and you'll hit. And I'll tell you which direction the javelin bounces off in. And Baldr took the javelin and hurled it with roughly as much strength as he thought was needed to cover the distance, and it struck Baldr and went straight through him. And Baldr staggered back, crashed to get over the furniture, and fell dead. And at first the gods thought that Baldr was just laughing and joking, that this was a ruse to make Baldr feel as if he was strong and powerful and had scored a veritable hit. And they roared with laughter, and then they told Baldr to get up, and Baldr did not get up. And they told him again and again, and then they started to realise that what at first felt like a joke, wearing thin, was no longer fun. And they rushed to him, and they saw the blood draining from him, spurting and gushing from the wound. And they felt the ward go a little darker and a little greyer. And word was carried around the hall. All of the gods were brought to try their magics, their healing. One after another tried everything they could think of, but the wound was a deep one and a fatal one. And nothing they could do restored Baldr to life. And when word was brought to Fensalia, the great palace in which his mother lived, Frigg, as the prophetess had predicted, wept and wept and wept. The earth shook for her weeping, the skies ran heavy with rain for her weeping, the land flooded for her weeping. It was decided in the days that followed, as the gods became used to the horror of Baldr's death, that a funeral fit for God should be organised. Hringhorni, Baldr's mighty ship, was brought forth and sailed to shore, and Baldr's body placed upon a bier decorated with flowers and with herbs, with his sword and his cloak laid across him and his shield, and he was carried down to the beach. But as they were bringing the ship round, it ran into a sandbank and became so wedged that nothing seemed to unwedge it. All of the gods, including Thor himself, huge and brawny and mighty, tried. They pushed, they shoved, they dragged, they did everything they could think of to do, but nothing would unwedge the boat from the sandbank. They turned to Odin, who knows so much about everything, and asked him what they could do. Was there a creature in the world stronger than Thor? And Odin, after some thought, said that there was a giantess who was rumoured to be the brawniest, the burliest, the most massive and powerful of, well, any kind of a being anywhere in the Nine Worlds. A creature called Hirokin, who could be called upon and persuaded to move the boat. The word was sent down to the land of the giants, and Hirokin came riding on the back of her gargantuan wolf, a wolf of enormous proportions like a moving mountain of fur. And she leapt from the back of the wolf as she arrived at the shore, and the earth shook from her landing. And the gods pointed at the boat, pointed at Hringhorni and said, "Can you move it? Can you shift this? Can you loosen it from the sandbank?" And rolling out her sleeves, this gargantuan creature stomped and thumped into the waters to the sandbank, and she heaved and she heaved and she heaved, and eventually, as the sweat poured from her brow and soaked into her tunic, the ship was moved, and with such a juddering that the very earth itself shook, Birds fell from trees. Houses toppled. An earthquake rippled across the land, but the ship was moved. And onto the ship was placed the body of poor Baldr. And the ship was pushed out to the sea. And the gods took their bows and their arrows and dipped the heads of the arrows in burning tar, and one by one they fired their arrows through the skies to land upon the ship as it sailed off, and the ship burst into flames and grew so bright it was like the very sun itself. And Nana, the wife of Baldr, she wept, she sobbed as she had been weeping for days upon days since his death. And she was so overcome with grief that she fell to the earth, her heart broken, and died as she watched the ship land. And it is said that on that day, the ship that burnt as bright as the sun consumed nearly an entire day from dawn when the ship was pushed out to the sea till late into the evening, burning. It became the brightest, longest day anyone had ever known, almost all day and hardly any night. And from that time to this, once a year upon the anniversary of the death, more to the point, the funeral of Baldr, the sun Suna remembers, and for that one day she burns long into the evening, the brightest and the longest day of the year, in memory. Because after the ship had sunk into the west, disappeared from sight, the waters consuming the last of the embers. Each day the light dwindled, the heat dwindled, it became a little greyer and a little greyer and a little greyer as the light of Baldr left the world, and the gods and the elves and the dwarves and the humans and the giants and all of the creatures and beings that live and walk and crawl and slither and fly and swim upon the earth descended into the lengthening night and the shortening days. And Odin thought again, could something be done? Could something be done to retrieve Baldr even now, even after his body had been consumed into ash, even after his soul had descended into the lands of the dead and was joining in the feast with the seeress and all of the other honoured dead in the great hall in Helheim. And so Odin journeyed down again in another of his disguises, down into the lands of Helheim. And there he met with Hela herself, queen of the lands of the dead. And he said, the world is grey, it's dark, our hearts grow heavy, the nights grow long. Never had I thought grief of such intensity could consume me, consume my wife, consume all those in Asgard. Is there nothing that can be done to return Baldr to the lands of the living? And Hela, who was not one for relinquishing the dead, said at length, if all weep for Baldr, every being, every human, every dwarf, every elf, every giant, every god, if all weep for Baldr, then I will return him to the lands of the living. But if there is one whose eye remains dry, who will shed no grief, Baldr stays with me in the lands of the dead. And Odin went back up to Asgard and informed the gods, and the gods went from the lands of the elves to the lands of the giants to the lands of mortal kind, of humans, or to all beings everywhere, and they told them this. They told them of the death of Baldr, those who had not heard, and almost everyone had, but they informed those who had not. They told them of the need to weep, to grieve, to mourn, and all did. Dogs and wolves threw back their heads and howled. Women wept, men wept, children wept. Dwarves wept, elves wept, the trees themselves wept and shed their leaves as a rain of tears. All things wept, bar one. A giantess by the name of Thok said she had no tears to shed for Baldr. He had brought her no pleasure in life, and she could shed no tears in death. And she slammed the door at the front of the cave in which she dwelt and refused to talk about it any more. And the night passed. Not one tear fell from Thok's eye. And so Hela kept Baldr in the lands of the dead for that one lack of weeping. And there are those who said that Thok the Unmourning perhaps was a giantess indeed, as she appeared to be, and others who said that perhaps this was yet again Loki in disguise, refusing to deny Hela her praise, her joy, the light of the underworld, refusing to let Baldr escape her, desert her. But whatever the cause may be, just as there was a long, long day of bright burning light when the ship incinerated, so there was a long, long dark night of weeping and sobbing and grief. But not enough to consume 24 hours. There was still enough dryness in the eyes of Thok for there to be a little light that day. And so the summer and the winter were balanced out. Baldr stayed dead, and the world had to learn to live without him.